All right, I think everyone on Zoom has finished trickling in, but we'll keep an eye on that. So good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Colby Cyrus. I'm a senior program manager here at the foundation. One of the staff leads on designing our nonprofit essentials workshop series. So we're really excited to see all of you here this morning. I really am excited to have this session with you all on planned giving and endowment building. So we have Tom and Rebecca here with us this morning to talk about that. And before I hand it over, I do just want to mention that we have one more workshop coming up later this fall in November through Bonadeo. So that'll be financial management and planning. So audits, statements of financials, all that fun stuff that we all love. So that'll be November 6th, 9 a.m. on Zoom. So make sure that you're on our mailing list so that you can be sure to sign up for that. And a few housekeeping notes. For those of us that are in person, the restrooms through the double doors and to the left. We will be recording this session and sending that out to everyone who registered. So this won't be available publicly, but while we're in the middle of our session, if there's anything that you want to talk about or discuss with our presenters that you prefer not be recorded, just let us know. We'd be happy to pause that for you. We will also be sharing the slides after the presentation. And throughout the presentation, if you have questions, just feel free to raise your hand. Tom and Rebecca are happy to answer questions throughout. For those of us on Zoom, feel free to use that raise hand feature that Zoom has built in, and we'll keep an eye on the screen and make sure that we haven't missed anybody. And my colleague Corey is monitoring the chat for us as well. So if you throw anything in there, we will be sure to get to you as well, and feel free to message him directly if anything comes up. And last but not least, we have a survey for you. We all love those, right? So after the session's over, we'll be sending out a survey to everyone who registered, and that'll help us kind of understand what went well, what you would have liked to have seen done differently, and most importantly, gives us ideas for other workshops that you think would be impactful in the future. So if you could take 60 seconds to fill that out at the end, we would greatly appreciate that. All right, nobody came here to hear me talk. You came here for these two, so I'm going to hand it over to Tom, and I want to thank you again for being here.
Thanks, Colby. And thanks to everybody in the room and everybody that's online. It's great to have a full virtual and actual room. And so we're looking forward to this discussion and dialogue today. So before we start, I'll just take a moment, pass the mic to Rebecca and let her introduce herself, and then I'll introduce myself, and then we'll get rolling.
Actually, can you hear me?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Can you hear?
They should be able
Okay,
to.
hopefully. But I'll project in the room.
Yeah, if you can't hear online, she's got a lapel mic, so hopefully that's working, but let us know. So
It's so nice to be here this morning. My name is Rebecca Cohen. I am a member at Bousquet Holstein. I've been there for almost 8 years. Before practicing law, or between practicing law, I was also a development director at a large nonprofit in Boston called Reach Out and Read, which was an early literacy organization, putting books in the hands of babies and young children from 0 to 5 at pediatric health centers around the country. So I've been in your shoes being a development director. Currently at Bousquet, I largely focus in immigration law, which is a lot of fun these days. I also do a lot of work with nonprofits around formation, dissolution, and other things that they need. And so I'm here today just to support Tom and to provide some insights that I have from the work I've had both in the development world and as an attorney.
thanks, Rebecca. So I'm Tom Griffith. I've been at the Community Foundation since 2013. I came on at that point to do gift planning and professional advisor outreach. I was a financial advisor before coming over to the Community Foundation. And this work is just near and dear to my heart, helping advisors help their clients, make the charitable gifts that in some cases are transformational for them. I became vice president of the department in 2018 and lead a great team of advisors and philanthropic services team members here. So I hope everyone brought their their Harvard manual for the tax aspects of charitable giving. We're going to go through sections one. Oh, wait, now. So I wanted to just point out what we're not going to talk about today is this. So, but this is a real thing. So we will allude to it as we go through the discussion. Same thing with, Brian Klontz is a national expert on non-cash gifts. His foundation does, the most real estate gifts, or second most in the country each year. So he is a partner of ours as well. But yeah, so lots we could cover, but that's not what we're going to be here for today. So the invitation to this session really spelled out what we were going to talk about. So have you ever wished your organization had a long-term reserve fund, or that your existing reserve fund was larger? Right. So in this, uncertainty with the landscape that we're going through, steady income, reliable income would be nice. I think every organization would want that, and want to add to that. And then the other piece that hopefully will come out of today is the importance of helping the people who love your organization, your donors and others, leave a connection to and support for your organization. So that is a big part of that as well. So actually, Corey, can you share the slides?
Yeah, give me a couple minutes.
Okay, so we're just on slide 3 when you get there. So a few other comments on that though. So a lot of people don't have a will. Like only 60% of people in America have a will or estate planning documents. Come on in. Yep, it's okay. Grab a seat. And for most of those people, their wills are 15 to 20 years old, which is not typically useful because most people have significant changes in their lives more frequently than 15 to 20 years. So, I mean, a lot of times people might do a will update when they have their first child, and 15, 20 years later, those children are, full-fledged adults. And so there's probably changes that need to be made. So that is another aspect of when a nonprofit does this kind of work, it gives us the opportunity to help our constituents actually become more robust with their planning in general. So yeah, and those numbers, by the way, are really skewed when you look at the generations. I mean, the silent generation's kind of leading the pack with nearly 70% of their people have a will, but 44% of baby boomers, 26% of Gen Xers. So I feel like really special that I have an updated will. By the way, my birthday is tomorrow, so just saying. And millennials just have a 22% rate of having a will. So that is a thing. So when we think about today, it's an opportunity to plant a tree, maybe even a forest. The planning is essential and yet is declining. Importance of legacy for community. We want that to be a key theme. And I'll just ask a question too for all of you in the room, just a thought question. How many of you can name your great-grandparents? Your great-grandparents. Oh. Okay. Right, so it's a smattering, right? So if we don't protect the legacies and share the legacies, I mean, people's family members can't necessarily, I mean, that is not an abnormal result, people's family members can't necessarily remember 3 generations ago. And so how valuable is that if we can do that for the people who cared about our organizations, and keep those stories going. All right, so I think we can go to the next slide. Community Foundation, just a level set for everybody. We're a tax-exempt public charity. This community foundation has been here for 98 years. There's community foundations in almost every single community that you live in the country. So if you move someplace at some point, there'll be a community foundation. If you have family members that live someplace else, they have a community foundation that serves them. And so, and effectively what we do is we create small foundations, funds, we call them, for people to do the things that were important to them. To do the charitable causes, take care of the charitable causes that are important to them, whether it's specific nonprofits, fields of interest, or general community support. Those are the kind of funds that we create here. And for the most part, those are permanent funds. About 2/3 of our funds are permanent funds. About 1/3 are what are called donor advised funds, which are flexible lifetime giving tools that donors can use to do their charitable giving throughout their lifetime. About 950 funds total here. And our total assets is about 490 million. And we gave out like $25 million in grants last year. So, yeah, I think we can go on, Corey.
So we also just want to call your attention to other resources. The Community Foundation is really a linchpin here in the, in Syracuse to help you navigate plan giving, but you are not alone. There's other resources out here, both locally and nationally. So there may be plan giving specialists within your national organization. If you are part of a national organization, you might also be able to develop your own plan giving capabilities, which obviously does depend on a lot of different factors. But your board and leadership might want to go in that direction and then develop those capabilities, the expertise and the staffing to support that work. There's also the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners. And here in the area, there's the Upstate Plan Giving Council. PG Calc has a suite of products you can look at online. It's pretty cool. And then there's certain marketing firms that focus in plan giving like Crescendo, and then many publications. So these slides will be available to you. This will be a resource you can come back to, but just to note that there's resources beyond the foundation. And also just our firm, Bousquet Holstein, has a really robust trust and estates department. I am not personally in that department, but I work with them all the time and they're fantastic and can also assist with plan giving. So just note that's also out there.
Great. So next slide, Corey. Got a good picture on it, so I'm gonna wait. So a long time ago in like 1914 was when income taxes were created. Wasn't always a thing. So shortly after, the charitable deduction was created. So shortly after that, the first community foundation was created in Cleveland. So we're the 30th oldest community foundation in the nation. There's about 900 community foundations now in the United States and a little over 1,200 community foundations in the world. So it's definitely a growing field. Yeah, and we're excited, to be coming up on our 100th anniversary, but the tax aspect of giving, as I mentioned, there's the Harvard Manual on tax aspects of charitable giving. It is a factor, but for the vast majority of the giving that you're going to be doing with people, it's not. It just isn't the driver. Main thing that people want to do is make gifts to the things that they love. And oftentimes that's going to be below the standard deduction, which is really high right now for lifetime gifts. And the vast majority of state gifts don't even have a role to play with respect to the estate tax. Most people don't get exposed to the estate tax at this point. Then the limits are so high, the exclusion amounts are so high. So it's a thing. We'll talk about it a little bit more as we go through, but it's not the thing. So
now we get to the fun part. For both those online and here in the room, we'd love to hear what you're hoping to learn today. So if those online could just pop any comments or questions in the chat, and we'll just open up the floor to anyone who wants to share with anything else they'd like to learn today beyond what Tom had highlighted at the beginning.
Anyone have a question?
I'm with an organization that has no plan giving anything, even an idea about it. I'd like to take home concrete ideas about how to start, how to maintain, how to do whatever we need to do at a totally rudimentary level.
Yeah, to piggyback off that a little bit, we're a small organization trying to figure out how to approach some of our bigger donors to have these conversations around kind of consistent long-term partnership and relationship. So like how to engage in those conversations.
I'm from a local church and we're finishing a renovation project. And where we've had to draw down significantly from our endowment and we'd like to build it back up. Hopefully get some pointers on how to do that.
Your on marketing, your plan giving, or the fact that you accept gifts in various forms.
I'll just build on that, in kind of the social status that we're in right now, where everyone is on an incredibly fixed income. How to approach marketing or giving in a way that is realistic. And, not compromising what we're trying to do as well.
Anyone else in the room? I'm gonna read through the ones in the chat for everybody's benefit here.
Someone ask my question.
Okay.
Thanks.
So for the benefit of everybody in the room who wasn't able to see it, my organization also has no plan giving. I'm looking to develop a plan to start. We're a small organization and looking for various ways to grow our donations and how to obtain them through new avenues. I'm also looking for info at the rudimentary level, as we haven't started a foundation, infrastructure for something like this, how to revive a dead program, same as all of the above. We are brand new to plan giving at Auburn Public Theater and just opened an account for our endowment. We have just started fundraising and are planning to start asking for plan gifts. So, thank you. Welcome.
Yeah.
All right, and we'll move to the poll questions.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think, is there a poll in the Zoom?
No, again, they just need to put their.
In the chat. So we're gonna just ask people here in the room and then on Zoom to let us know how many planned gifts you typically receive in a year. And are you now or planning to start asking for planned gifts? So. How
Maybe
many?
the second one is easier first.
Yes.
Just raise your hand if you're planning to start asking for planned gifts. All right,
And
unanimous, okay,
then we can give a minute for online.
yeah. And for the other one, just like, how many of you are like in the range of 0 to 5 planned gifts a year? And if I took 0 out and made it 1 to 5, how many are? Okay, all right. Okay. Good, yeah, so we can move on then, Corey.
I have a very basic question. Define plan gifts.
Well, look at that.
So we're gonna start from the beginning. What is plan giving? The common thread with a planned gift is that whether created now or in the future, there's a component that is planned for the future. So it's usually part of your retirement and or your estate plan. And it requires collaboration by a mix of advisors, including tax, estate, and financial planners. And really, and this is sort of the take home for your donors, is it's another way to support organizations that you care about, that you love. And often you can do so in a more substantial way later in life or after you pass than you could during your life. So that's the message and the shift in messaging that will be important to communicate.
And I think that to the comment that was made about in the tight economy, how can we be, realistic? Literally, these gifts can have zero impact on somebody's day-to-day today. It can only become a factor when they pass away. So that is what makes it compelling for now. So, and I think, by the way, none of the things you wrote down were surprises or not going to be covered, I think. So hopefully, I will come back to the list when we get done and just make sure that those got all answered, but yep. Question in the room.
So my name is Jim Dungy, and I'm from the Casanova Preservation Foundation and Bear Hansen. And one of the things, and I might be jumping the gun, but the third bullet requires collaboration by advisors, tax, estate, and financial planning. From my experience, this is where things start to fall apart. You can have a great conversation with a person that, they want to do it, but then the mechanics of making it happen have often, gotten a little bit away. Now, we are involved with the, Central New York Community Foundation, and what we found from them that they are very willing to help for people who have
A fund with us.
yes, an agency fund with them. When it comes to some of this complication, am I saying that correctly? Is that the way you would put it? That you have this willingness to help? Because some of these things get really complicated, and especially if there's children involved. And then, my conversation with my own family is about, depending on the shape you're in when I die, the family is in when I die, you can do this, or you might not be able to do that. So then what? Because a lot of us are not in a situation where they're, for average income or retired people, they don't always really know. Nobody knows what the future holds, but it's a delicate situation. Like, I've got agreement from my family that depend on the situation. I would love to, if we could do this, but if the situation is not that, then do what you can. That's what I can do. And that's what I think a lot of people can do, especially if there's families involved. If we're talking about a different level of people with resources, it might be a different kind of conversation. But I don't know.
It's much easier if you can just work with the people who know exactly when they're gonna die. Makes it so much better. And literally if they can, if it's in with like a few days, and then exactly what they're gonna have, then it makes it so simple. Yeah, and this work does take patience. It does take acceptance of the fact that a lot of what you might do with somebody might become overcome by events. They may end up being in long-term care for the last 15 years of their lives, and all of their resources get sucked away. There may be family changes that require, more of their assets or all of their assets to be directed towards that part of the equation. Ultimately, there's three places where a person's assets can go when they pass away, and that is family, charities, or other family or other beneficiaries, individuals, charities, or taxes. So no one chooses the third bucket. So willingly anyway. But there is that balance that's constant between those two. And frankly, sometimes people just change their minds about what they, what's important to them. So you also have to be willing to accept the fact that your discernment work with somebody and your engagement with them, might also they might move to Naples and really love some other organization there, and their plan might change. Not saying that happens.
It happens.
So, all right. Yeah, so next slide, Corey.
There was a question in the chat, just.
Yeah, Tom, I was just gonna interrupt. It says, what happens to a planned gift if the organization disbands or no longer exists and you don't realize it before you pass away?
Yeah, so like there was probably back when the Syracuse Symphony folded, you know, just 1,000 estate planning attorneys, like going, wow, I need to revise like, so many of my estate plans for my clients because they named the Syracuse Symphony in their, estates or, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't quite that much, but at the same time, I'm sure it got brought up and there are there's legal processes for that, the probate court handles that. So it's, you don't always know what the answer is going to be, but it's argued and discussed and decided by the court. So
Situational.
yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So we'll keep addressing some of those other thoughts, and absolutely just keep bringing up questions and comments as we go along. Because we are going to get deeper. We're still in the shallow end of the pool. So what is an endowment? So an endowment is a permanent fund that provides annual support. It's typically not accessible. You can't access the corpus of it. It just provides an income stream, a spendable amount each year. It's invested for growth. It grows and keeps pace with inflation, hopefully over time, and sends out reliable income year after year. It's a way to balance current and future needs. So when you have a donor that creates an endowment for you, they're obviously, wanting to, I like to think about it as maybe they're replacing what they did for you year after year when they were alive. They want that same support to continue after they're gone. And so how wonderful would that be if every single one of our donors did that, right? And then you just kept having this growing, donor base, the first one that's automatic, and then the second one that is, the lifetime givers that you're stewarding and growing and working through that. Sometimes it's general support and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's like, I want this program that I loved to go on forever, and that can be hard, and again, depending on where the endowment lives, that can be a thing that, needs to be addressed if that program goes away or if the organization goes away. That's the hedge that we provide at the Community Foundation. We have variance power inside our bylaws. The recognition is that the community foundations are going to be around longer in the communities than most of the nonprofits. So there's going to be this need to sort of pivot the support that a fund provides. And we do a lot of work with donors to really understand why they're supporting that organization. Like the Syracuse Symphony example, when that happened, we had a bunch of funds that supported the Syracuse Symphony. Not a lot of them got repurposed to Symphoria. We looked at each one, looked at what was important about that gift to the symphony from those donors when they created their fund. And then we went and found the right organization locally to match that purpose. So that's a value, and that's something that a lot of donors appreciate. So. Next slide, Corey. So planned giving and endowments are a great thing because you don't know when planned gifts are coming. Endowments can be a great home for something that's extra that you want to grow and keep effective for your organization. It requires some pre-thought though. It requires your organization to make some choices. Best practices include doing things like saying, wow, if we get a planned gift that comes out of nowhere, at least half is going to go into the future fund. We'll figure out in the moment where the other half goes. Having sort of rules like that maybe even prior boards set as an example for future boards can create a culture around prioritizing the future needs as well as the current needs. And that's hard, that's hard to do, and especially in a time like today. Right? And so, and those rules that a board sets for itself can definitely be undone. It's not like they're permanent. But if you have a endowment vehicle and you focus on planned gifts, hopefully you'll get to the point where that stream can be allocated in a way to the future. So. Yep.
Just taking a step back and thinking about obstacles to nonprofit sustainability. Everything on this bulleted list is probably something you're familiar with, but just to highlight a few, annual campaigns or annualitis can become a super intense focus that can be hard to focus on other things and may or may not be, bang for your buck in terms of the amount of time and what that campaign yields. And similar with the campaign syndrome, if you're focused on a campaign for a building project or something specific, you can be pouring all of your development resources into that, and it may not, it may take you away, your energy away from other more diverse ways of achieving funding. Of course, budgeting and the challenges that nonprofits are facing, especially today. Any staff reductions can change how a nonprofit operates if you have a leaner staff, especially that can focus on development. Similarly, if there's a crisis, and all hands on deck to address that crisis, and then you're really just trying to tread above water to stay alive. So, you will have the slides. I won't go through all of these, but I think, revenue diversification is key here, and the lack of revenue diversification, it's federal or state funding, or grants that may go away in this climate. Those are things that really point towards diversifying the portfolio. So I'm going to the next slide. You're well aware of nonprofit revenue sources, and we just wanted to highlight here that those that are bolded, planned and major gifts, deferred gifts, investment income, those are the pieces that we're focusing on here today, and that a lot of nonprofits don't have or don't utilize at this time. So we just wanted to kind of show you that having diversity is important, and really thinking about, are these pieces that you can add to the portfolio?
Yeah, and also I'll just add, I was with an organization that was 100% government grant funded recently, and they had not experienced a reduction in that yet. But that was, this year has been a wake-up call, and when they consider, they were definitely looking at what are the things we can build in off of these, what other revenue streams can we build in. Yeah, and planned giving may not be the first that you want to build in, but it definitely is an important one. So, any questions at this point before we kind of move into the next section? Ken?
What's the difference with, one of your bullets is internet/social media, and another one is contributions to annual campaigns?
So the social media, I think, and doing things that like share about your organization online tend to have the ability to click and say donate now, and might generate some interest and some donations. I think the annual campaign is a little bit more of a defined approach, with all the different pieces, whether it's direct mail, emails, outreach. It might also have social media component to it, all of those things. I mean, some might have telethons, so.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions on this or anything that we kind of covered so far? All right. All right, Corey. So why now? So the transfer of wealth that's happening between generations is huge right now, between the silent generation and the baby boomers, and now starting from the baby boomers to the next generation. The amount of wealth that's expected to transfer generations is really staggering. I mean, the trillions, can't be really comprehended. But what we did for our community back in 2011, we worked with an organization to do a transfer of wealth study, where they went and actually looked at what was the situation in our 5-county region. We redid that study in 2021, 2022, and updated that for the next decade and saw very similar results. But if you want to go to the next slide, Corey. And then just go ahead and go one more. So and when we look at, why would you consider giving to a local charity in your estate? It's because we have all of these things that we're working on, that we're trying to affect change in this community. All these things that have been important to you while you lived here. And this is the place, the moment where by including it in your estate, we can create a permanent, long-term, sustainable resource to provide those grants. And the 5 for CMY campaign is a campaign we created where we said, what if everybody in our community just gave 5% to the local nonprofits that they care about? 95% can still go to the kids. What if everybody just did 5%? And that's not how it works, because some people don't even have kids, and some people want to treat charity as a 4th kid, and divide their estate in that way. But if you go to the next slide, Corey, what we saw is that there's about $25 billion that's estimated to transfer between generations in the next 10 years here. It's about $80,000 on average per household. If everybody did 5%, that would be $1.3 billion. Community Foundation's been here for 98 years, and we have $490 million. Most, not all of it endowed. So $1.3 billion of endowed dollars, and that's what we're talking about. We wanted 5% to go to permanent resource for local nonprofits. That would be a game changer. And in fact, over the years going forward, would produce about $74 million a year in grants. Grant support for different nonprofits, whether it's directly to them because it's just for their benefit, or whether it's for at the Community Foundation in our community fund to support greatest to nonprofits the way we do through our responsive grant making and initiative work. So that is just huge. We have about $4 million in total that is out of the initiative and responsive grant making work. That's what we are able to deploy now. So 74 million. I just want that to sit for a second. So, but again, are we going to get all the people to do 5%? Probably not. But at the same time, we need to get this thought, into people's heads that this is an important thing. This is something I need to actually consider, especially all the people that have been civically engaged. And the main reason why a person doesn't leave a planned gift is because they weren't asked to leave a planned gift. Okay. So, yeah, I think I beat that one. So. All right.
So I think just by the show of hands we saw for who had, once we got above the 0 for 1 to 5, most CNY nonprofits do not have a planned giving program or accept complex gifts or have a legacy society. And so as we think about preparing for wealth transfer here in the county or surrounding counties, we want to make sure that the wealth that's been made here is staying to staying past the next generation. And many of the next generation that's benefiting from the wealth is not here. They're in Arizona, they're in Florida, they're in California, Carolinas. And so thinking about how do we capture that wealth? The other thing to consider is this idea of the millionaire next door. We don't really know we don't really know what kind of wealth and savings our neighbors, our community members have. We can make assumptions based on cars people drive or houses people have, but we don't know. And so I think it's really trying to think openly about everyone as a possible donor from a major gift standpoint or plan giving. So the next slide, please. As you think about types of plan gifts, and I think Tom is the expert in probably developing a program for this, but some ways to make plan gifts for starting from scratch. Bequests in a will, beneficiary designations, life insurance, charitable trusts, real estate, charitable gift communities. And really, starting from the basics, I think one of the ideas I had listening to your questions is really trying to simplify this for you and for your prospective donors. Beneficiary designations and life insurance are just forms. When you fill them out, it is not complicated, and you probably don't need this whole suite of planners and advisors to help set that up. So if you can convince, donors to potentially think about that through some of these vehicles of a beneficiary or alternate beneficiary designation or life insurance, that's a great place to start. And you might just do that with a life insurance agent or advisor, which wouldn't cost someone more money, right? Bequests are a little harder because you have to incorporate those into a will, or certainly be part of updates to wills, but something to consider, even to give best practices for, people that are aging and thinking about their wills, to have a review cycle with their estate attorney, and then to think about how they might make adjustments and tweaks as they think ahead to organizations and charities that are near and dear. And then wanted to chat on the tax pieces as well.
Yeah, so I'll just also highlight, the 80-20 rule that applies. I think definitely the most straightforward approaches are the 80%. It may even be like the 98% rule. It's most of the things are going to be those beneficiary designations or bequests in the will. So just one simple thing you can do when you get back is check to see if your organization already has language for how they would like to be included in a will. And it's typically just, telling a donor to say, I bequest, give to blank, parentheses, your EIN number, because your address may change, but your EIN number will not. For their general use. It can be very straightforward. If you have an attorney on your board, they could probably help you with that. If you have an attorney that represents your organization, they should be included in that. Same thing with beneficiary designation. All you really need is your name, your EIN number, and your address to be listed as a beneficiary. And having those things available, present, someplace where they're visible to your people, whether it's on the bottom of the front of your newsletter, the bottom of the back of your newsletter, the giving page on your website, and just bringing it up from time to time too, just saying, hey, have you, by the way, reviewed your beneficiary designations? Have you updated your will? Those kinds of questions, especially, that we have a member, from a church. That can be an important thing to share with your congregation, to say, and selfishly also, please include us and any other nonprofits that you care about when you do that update, and go from there. So
it should always be one of the ways to give. So whenever you're previewing or sharing ways to give on your website or an email or even an annual campaign, I think it's just important to include planned giving in that list. And sometimes we're reticent to do that because it's where do you start? But I think those are great ideas of where to start, having the language ready.
Yeah, and we also have a toolkit for nonprofits. Any nonprofit, doesn't have to be a nonprofit that has a fund with us. Any nonprofit can request our nonprofit toolkit around the 5 for CNY data and, messaging. And you can make that be specific, doesn't have to even involve the community foundation. You just make it 5 for CNY. Was a study that shows that if people leave at least 5% of their estates, it would make a big difference for local nonprofits. And we're one of those, so, we'd love it if you would consider doing that, so it's a toolkit that you can request online, at cnycf.org. So.
I think building your case for plan giving, to show that ripple effect of what that investment can do. The more you can build the case, the more people can wrap their heads around, okay, maybe this is something important I should consider that wouldn't have otherwise been on my radar.
So we're going to talk a little bit about taxes coming up, so trigger warning. But before that, anything, comments or questions online or in the room? Yep.
We keep, in our appeals, we keep saying, oh, consult your attorney, etc. But these days, a lot of wills are do-it-yourself online. Is that a possible avenue to use also?
Absolutely, that is something that people are using. There's no difference in including a nonprofit organization in a will that you do online versus doing it with an attorney that you have here. I personally like having a personal attorney that I can go to that reached out and reminded me that my kids turned 18, and needed to update some documents because of that, so there's things where you can see value in that, but yeah, absolutely, there are people that are using that tool and the instructions that you provide would be the same. So, you don't want to not have that available for them too. So, all right. Other questions before we move into the tax stuff? Okay. All right. So when you think about a donor, every donor is different. They have different things and they have different needs, right? So some might need an income stream. Some might have an asset that when they get rid of it causes a big tax problem for them. Some might have other, life goals or family situations that require, different planning. So I will just say that, well, I'll tell a quick story. There's an estate planning attorney I know who was working with a high net worth client who did have a New York State estate tax problem, exposure, and he designed this wonderful plan that eliminated all of the New York State estate tax. And then they implemented it, life was good. And then there was a discussion that one spouse had with a friend, and they said, oh no, you need to be the beneficiary on all of the IRAs. You need to have your name there, not whatever, the estate planning attorney did. And so she went and changed all the beneficiaries on all the IRAs. And when the person passed away, $1 million tax bill arose because of that. So it's just planning and involving the right planners and having the right plan can be pivotal and crucial depending on the person's situation. And again, like Rebecca said, we don't know what people have. As charitable planners, we're probably the least informed person of their advisors regarding what their assets, net worth, and other things are, right? And sometimes they tell us parts of it, but we definitely don't have the big picture. So I'll just reiterate that, in cases like this, it's important to make sure that they know they need to be talking to their advisors. But, so if it's an income stream, there might be some tools like charitable gift annuities or charitable remainder trusts. Those can provide income streams to people and charitable deductions and put resources to charitable work when they pass away. So that's a great, tool there. I've also had people come to me and say, I want a charitable gift annuity. I was like, oh, interesting. Tell me why. And well, my friend has one. Okay. Do you need more income? No. Okay, so let's maybe restart the conversation and go back to, what is it you're trying to achieve? That kind of discernment. And nonprofits don't necessarily have to, you don't have to bring that capacity to the table. You don't need to be a former financial advisor. You don't need to be a chartered advisor in philanthropy or a accredited estate planner to have these conversations. You just need to know that what's important to say, well, I don't know if that's right for you. You should talk to your advisor before you decide whether that's something that's important to you. This is what this can do. If you decide you're going to, provide charitable gift annuities either on your own or through a partner. We use the National Gift Annuity Foundation, which I think is a great resource and something that any nonprofit could use directly, just like we do for those. So that is a tool that could be useful, but you don't want to be suggesting that when that's not what somebody needs, because eventually they're going to figure out, oh, I don't need that. Why am I getting this 1099 late every year? Because they have to, it's holding up me being able to do my taxes, and I'm only getting like $700 a year from this thing. It's not meaningful to my life. So they'll figure out eventually that this isn't a tool for them. So it's also not part of that flywheel of strengthening the relationship if you recommend or suggest something that's not right. Corey, you want to go to the next slide? And then just a really basic example with an IRA. So if you have a donor who's got $100,000 IRA and $100,000 bank account, if they do the charitable bequest with the cash versus leaving the IRA to the non-taxable entity, it changes what everybody gets. If they leave the cash to their heir, the heir will get $100,000. That's not taxable to them. But if they leave the IRA to the heir's only gonna get about $65,000 because that's taxable to them. And that's a lump sum, and that'll bump up their adjusted gross income by $100,000 that year. So that is a meaningful difference. I mean, a really simple shift in the planning that most people aren't necessarily even going to think about. And they may already have their kid as the beneficiary of their IRA. It might mean some work for them to go change that and say, okay, well, maybe my nonprofits that I want to support need to be supported by the IRA. And I just give the cash to charity. Any questions on that? Okay. All right, next slide. So I mentioned that an endowment is invested. And so it's invested for long-term growth, which means it has some relatively significant risk. I liken it to a person that's about to enter into retirement with their IRA. It's probably that same risk level. You still need the dollars to grow and keep pace with inflation for the next 20, 30 plus years. But you also need to start using it. You need to have some draw on it and have that be effective for that purpose. So by investing it in a growth way, what you see on the orange line is what the fund balance is going to do. So the fund balance is going to vary quite a bit. But when you have an endowment, you typically have an endowment spending policy that doesn't necessarily just base it off of a single year. Here at the Community Foundation, we use a 20-quarter rolling average when we look at what to spend from an endowment. So we look back 5 years, average the balance, and then apply a spending rate to that. It's typically between 4 and 5%. Right now it's 4.4%. Doesn't change that frequently because it's kind of based off of long-term projections of inflation and asset performances, and what the different asset classes will perform in our investment pool. But by doing that muting, that averaging, what ends up happening is you see the spending or the distributions from the fund are steady, and you get this nice linear result where every year you get a slightly more coming out of the endowment and providing support for your organization. Hopefully in a way that makes it continue to be effective, even if no additional dollars go in there. And I think this one has like a $250,000 starting balance in 1982. By 2012, it needs to have grown to be worth the same amount, right? $250,000 then is not $250,000 now. So, but we're seeing that it is. It's the balance is near 1.25 million at this point. So, and this could be a thing that your nonprofit organization doesn't want to do. This would require an investment policy statement. This would require, hiring somebody to, manage the investment. This requires compliance with the New York Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act. So this is one of those things where the Community Foundation can be a resource by taking that part of the equation off of your nonprofit board. And as a person that wants to engage planned giving, and we started at the beginning saying planned giving and endowments go hand in hand, that also means you need to convince your board and your leadership that having an endowment is a good thing, or a quasi endowment. And so having an approach with that is straightforward and doesn't require more onus on your board or on your organization is a good thing. So, all right, Corey. So I just wanted to spend a second on the distinction. So we had Casanova Preservation Foundation talk about the fact that they've got an agency fund. There's others in the room that have an agency fund with us. And there's a distinction between a true endowment, which would be a designated fund named for your nonprofit, supporting your nonprofit year after year. That's what I described before. Agency fund is a fund that the organization creates for themselves, and donors can give to, but they can still give to the organization, and then you can decide as the organization what goes into the agency fund. And it remains an asset on your books because it's solely for your own benefit. Becomes a legal gift to the Community Foundation, so we take that fiduciary duty to manage it and invest it and grow it and all the compliance that goes with that. And in most cases, the assets are fully accessible. Most of the nonprofits that we work with, we have about 110 that have agency funds. They treat it like it's an endowment. They take what we recommend as a spendable amount. It's not the required thing that they can take. They can take more, they can take less, they can take nothing. But most of them do just take that steady income stream. That's why they created it. It's why they wanted it. Provides that, item on their budget each year. So, any questions on that?
Not really a question, but a comment. I think that for CPF, our organization, one of the things that's happened with us, we were very fortunate to have a donor who helped us to establish the agency fund. And I think in many regards, this is helped us in starting to launch a more significant campaign in the planned area. Largely because we know now that we have some backup in terms of somebody to answer the questions that are some of the more sophisticated giving questions. And so I think in some ways, you know, and if any of you have certain donors that you think could help to fund that bottom line agency fund, and I know how hard it is because of annualitis and other issues to do that. If you have a significant funder that wants to, that you really need those funds to fund annual operations. But if you can get there, I think it's gonna be a great tool for us.
Thank you. Yes.
Can I ask, as for St. Paul's, so we're just down the street. St. Paul's, can we as a church have an agency fund here at the Community Foundation?
Yes. Yeah, churches, nonprofits, yeah. Bronson.
I would, just a couple comments. The only thing that we've run into is, in this particular comes together, our annual audit every year, and when we changed auditors in the last year, we still are constantly having conversations about the language we use. So as a word of caution, like we have an agency fund here, our organization does. We do not call it an endowment. Endowment is a word that gets auditors really jittery and.
Yeah, it has an actual
As a meaning,
definition.
and that's the
Right.
problem, and that creates a whole can of worms. So we call it an endowment-like fund, so that our donors recognize that that's our intent, but that we use the agency fund as a vehicle to achieve that goal. So just kind of a little bit of a word of caution. And along those lines, it's come up every year of, why do you have the agency fund? You know, even our auditors aren't necessarily familiar with it. You've given up variance power. This is a gift to the community foundation. How, you know, so there's some education that almost has to take place on our part to be able to do that.
Yeah, and absolutely. When we talk about an agency fund with a nonprofit, we kind of go through those distinctions to make sure it's clear. This is a completely legal gift. And yes, we could say no to a distribution depending on what your situation is. You know, if we were concerned that your financial situation was unstable to the point where a distribution back might just go to pay creditors or keep your doors open for 2 more weeks or something, you know, we might say, no, I mean, these gifts were provided for charitable purpose and we can still deliver on that purpose, just not through that organization. I will also say that, you know, we've not had to do that, at least in the 13 years, you know, that I've been here. So, I don't think we did it before. So it is not a common thing that we have to do. But we absolutely have many times helped nonprofits that do decide to dissolve, repurpose their charitable funds for going forward, you know, because they also want that mission to continue. I mean, that's why they existed, so.
I mean, this year alone, we had requests for like documentation, letters, every piece of material we give to a donor, making sure that we don't say it's an endowment. Making sure that language says endowment-like, or, you know.
Yeah, we don't let people include the word endowment in their fund name. We encourage them to use words like sustainable fund, long-term fund, you know, things like that when they create their marketing. We're gonna talk about that in a minute too, about marketing pieces. But Anne, did you have a question? Or?
I have like 14 questions. Found that last comment very helpful about that language, so thank you. Is there a minimum dollar? Are there minimums for dollars for a startup for an agency fund?
Yes.
Or a donor number and a time that fund has to last? That's one question. And then
Okay, question 1 is, yes, there's a minimum, it's $10,000. I mean, our purpose is to help you grow that and have it forever. But if for something came up and you decided you wanted to take it back and spend the dollars in their entirety, you know, that can happen in the very first year and it can close, so.
is there a time that one has to keep that I mean, this is ridiculous, but could it, just to make a point, could it be open for a month and then closed, or do you have to have it open for 5 years or?
Well, we would probably, if you were intending to only have it for a month, we'd be like, well, why are you? Because it's intended to be for long-term investment. So we would probably not open that fund, but at the same time, no, there's no set time limit.
What's the fee for that fund?
So fees for funds here at the Community Foundation are typically 1% of the average balance in a year. For nonprofit agency funds, we actually discount that down to 0.75% to start. And if you get over $1 million, the fee goes down.
How would one do drawdowns? I mean, if we've got a $10,000 fund, we probably can't spend that money, right? To keep, because that's the minimum. But if it's $100,000, can we?
No, you can absolutely. So from the moment it's created, if it's a $10,000 fund, we'll recommend a spendable amount. It'd be between $400 and $500 probably. We recommend that to you in the beginning of the year. You can take that in the springtime or anytime throughout the year. We offer it in the springtime first, and then you can take it. You can also request on-demand distributions if something comes up and you need dollars. You know, it's just the $10,000 is just to show that you are, you know, have a desire to start the fund and you have a reasonable amount to start with. You don't have to hold it at that level. So,
Last question. Why in the world, given all of that, why would an organization not do this?
well, Bronson made the point pretty clearly. It is giving up legal control. You know, so that might be a stumbling block. That is a stumbling block. I mean, I definitely have nonprofits that I go in and I talk to, and they're like, we like all of that except the legal control part. And so, yeah, we're not going to do this. And that's absolutely fine. So, but
Thanks.
it's not a fit for everybody.
I would just add for like our organization, it was a balancing of risk reward. We want to set up a foundation to have something separate. Well, there's a lot of costs associated with that, much greater than the 1% fee. So it was that trade-off, and it's even the conversation literally last week with our auditor to say, no, yes, we gave up legal control, but community foundations wouldn't exist if they ignored donors and ignored what our intent was to want to do that. They aren't going to take this money and go do something nefarious with it. That's their whole business model
we
is
would be
based
out
on
of
that,
the
right?
agency
So
fund business model.
legally, yes, we don't control it, but practically speaking, we still, you know, and it's actually an assurance that there's that level of protection. If there is some hostile takeover or something, that they can access those funds. So.
Right. Thank you for that. Yes.
Talk about kind of differentiation between the agency fund and the endowment and the benefits of doing one or the other.
Sure. Yeah. So just to kind of, so the question was, what's the difference and what's the benefit? So a designated fund really is a great fit for when a donor wants, like for example, the minimum for a designated fund is $25,000. That creates $1,000 a year. And so say you had a donor who's giving you $1,000 a year, and their whole goal is, I just want my $1,000 a year to continue after I'm gone forever. The designated fund works perfectly for that. It provides that unrestricted check to the agency from this designated fund year after year after year, just like they did when they were alive. It doesn't give the agency access to the 25,000. The agency fund does give the agency access to the 25,000. That is accessible because it's not an actual endowment. It's a quasi or board designated, you know, kind of endowment, treated like an endowment. So, so they do have access to the balance. I think that's really the main differences because they're invested the same way. Otherwise, you know, they're sort of designed the same way.
If a donor creates a designated fund and stipulates that it goes to a particular type of community need, let's say urban youth or resident or the arts, do they have total control over how proceeds of that fund are distributed?
So you mean to a particular nonprofit, like if it's going to your nonprofit and they name that program, or are you talking about through the community foundation?
No, but. Let me say this another way. Can a donor create a designated fund for a particular purpose rather than an individual charity?
So we call those, like if they just have a cause or something like that, we call that a field of interest fund. And we do administer that type of fund. And we ask nonprofits to apply each year. And then we distribute those field of interest funds to nonprofits doing that work that the field of interest fund cared about.
But that's at your discretion, not the donors.
They do, yeah, they have to rely on us to make the decision. They need somebody to make the decision, whether it's through us or through like a trust or, you know.
Yeah, I think you can tailor the language to be more specific or general, but the more general it is, you do need someone else to be making that decision. So it's not optimal for a nonprofit. You want to be as specific as you can.
So a particular donor who wants to help urban youth at risk and starts a special interest can't come to you annually at tax time and say, 100,000 to Boys and Girls Club, 100,000 Hillside, 100,000 to Brooklyn. You can't do that.
With the
No.
field of interest fund.
No. There are tools for that. I mean, they could create their own private foundation and do it. They could create a donor advised fund if they're alive, or if they have heirs that would be successor advisors, they could do that. So there are tools for that, but
That's another question that I have. How is a donor advised fund, designated fund? Are they one and the same?
no. Yeah, designated funds are permanent. And the donor sets the intention in the beginning, but it can't change. Donor advised funds, the donor gets to decide every time which organization, how much, what purpose. Yeah. All right.
Tom, just real quick in the chat was, how can we set up an agency fund with a community foundation?
So yeah, that's just really easy. Just call us, email us, and we'll talk about what your organization is looking to do and find a plan for engaging your team, your board, to talk about it. Yeah, so I won't spend a lot of time here. Best practices with agency funds are really, you need a plan, you need a goal, you need your board on board with it. One thing is like donors can't give to the agency fund with specific purposes. It needs to be unrestricted. We're not going to track those restrictions in there. So if you receive a gift from a donor that has a restriction, you just need to keep that and figure out how to deal with that. Or if it's big enough, create a separate agency fund just for that. So we have some nonprofits that have multiple agency funds, and they are like for this program, general, so like that is an option as well, but we don't do that donor intent management. That's still on your side, as well as the donor stewardship is still on your side. We do the things like send letters to acknowledge for tax purposes, and facilitate the gifts, and especially if they're complex, like had an entity receive a trailer park as a gift. We helped get that gift into their fund. So all right. So next slide. Yep, that's it. Yep. So hope is not a strategy is a great quote. So you should really talk through those questions. What's the purpose? What's the goal? And who's going to be responsible? And sometimes it's the board. Sometimes it's the board that's going to be responsible and do the outreach. Sometimes it's the staff, and sometimes it's a blend. And sometimes that changes over time. So, and then next slide. I mentioned this a little bit, having a gift acceptance policy. When you have a fund at an agency fund at the community foundation, our gift acceptance policy is broad and provides probably a much bigger set of things that can be received. You as an entity want to think about that. Another thing is like when you have someone that tells you they want to leave you in their will, a gift in their will. You could say, oh, we do that by pointing it to the community foundation for benefit of our agency fund. And the reason you would want to do that is because then my team interacts with the estate, does all the things that have to be done with the estate, handles getting that gift and getting it into your agency fund. And your team doesn't have to do any of that. If you did it the other way, where your organization is the direct beneficiary of it, you have to do all the work with the estate. We can't do that on your behalf. You know, you can still then decide that when you receive the gift, that it goes into the agency fund, but we can't, we aren't your fiduciary for that, you know.
That's a huge value add. I mean, to your point of where things fall apart, I think have people that are doing this day in and day out to take that off your plate without additional costs to your organization that's likely leanly staffed is a huge win.
Yeah, and then those other questions there, you know, like we've mentioned it already, like if you exceed your, you know, goals, you know, what's going to the endowment? You know, what other opportunities can you leverage to talk about adding to the endowment that's kind of not annual campaign related? You know, if you have a founder retiring, that might be a great opportunity to talk about, you know, an additional thing, you know, remember us in your estate plans.
Tom, just real quick in the chat, someone asked if you come to do discussions or presentations at nonprofits to educate potential supporters.
Yeah, absolutely. Like my team and I would love to come and talk to nonprofits about 5 for CNY, about planned giving in general. You know, I did a multi-part series with an estate planning attorney at DeWitt Community Church a few years ago. You know, we're open to having those conversations at any point. And yeah, I mean, if I could do this and 5 for CNY presentations as my sole job, I would take it. That's like my mission. It gets me excited in the morning. I like cut my hand, you know, when I was undoing an avocado, and the first thought that ran through my mind was, what if I can't do my plank? It wasn't a near-death experience, but it kind of felt like that.
Also, just thinking about that from a marketing standpoint, when you're thinking about where to start, if you were to use a presentation, like an info session like that, that's a great way to start getting the word out to your donors or potential donors, to then come and get the information, and then you would have all the marketing materials, and, you know, if you kind of had all your ducks in a row, that's a great kickoff, and then you can follow that up. But it's a nice way to provide information and resources without an ask, and then you could kind of move along the process for interested parties. Yeah.
I've been sharing a lot of your plan giving posts online, and that usually generates a phone call or two.
Yeah. Yeah. I think sharing information is such a great way to make connections and provide, again, value add to your donors, followers, volunteers, and then just informs them about what they might want to do with plan giving for your organization or any other. So
The next segues perfectly into the next slide, which is really how do you market? You know, this isn't the place to start. You need to figure out the plan first. You need to figure out the approach. You know, you need to figure out, you know, the questions that need to be answered, you know, but when you get to that point, you know, it's not inventing a new wheel, you know, it's existing communication channels. It's including into all the things that you normally do now, your emails, your mailers, your newsletter. You know, you can even include it at the bottom of your letterhead or at the end of certain letters as a postscript.
For a nonprofit that has one agency fund, can people give directly online to that?
Yes, absolutely. So the fund has every fund has a link and they can give directly to that. And if they don't want to give cash, they can also just reach out to us and we can help them give, stocks, mutual funds, Bitcoin, whatever. So, yeah, and then the key, I think, is to share stories. All of the things that we do with respect to marketing is really storytelling. That's where people can see mission, they see impact, and they see others that are maybe like them, and they can say, oh, wow, well, if they can do it, maybe I can do it. It can inspire that greater giving. And that's really very powerful. And when you do think about like those first people that you might be talking to in a camp, as you start outreaching around planned giving, the most like if you're starting with your best friends, they're gonna say yes when you ask them to include your organization in their estate plans. But the most important yes to get in those conversations is to say, can we share your story of this gift? It doesn't have to be long. It can just be like a few sentences, where they say, I've loved this work for, and wanted my, impact to go on after I pass away. Or you don't use those words, but after I'm gone, that wanted that impact to live on forever. And so that is the most important thing, is to keep getting people to agree to share the stories so that you can keep that storytelling going. So next slide. Legacy Society. This is like so crucial. You also need to like hold them in your palm like you do any other donors, especially any other significant donors. The average planned gift is around $35,000 national, right? So how would you treat somebody that gave you $35,000? And to what Rebecca said, with millionaires next door, depending on what kind of situation they have, it might be much bigger than that, than what they leave. So we encourage these societies to be inclusive. By the way, we don't ask donors when they create a legacy plan how much money. Sometimes they tell us, and we talked about this already. The simple fact of the matter is they don't know, right? I mean, sometimes it's a set request, but sometimes that also goes away, so. So it's not about the size. It's just about them acknowledging it. We never here at the Community Foundation ask for a copy of their will or a copy of their beneficiary form or any sort of documentation that proves that they did what they said they did. And you also have to be like sensitive to what they want. They may not want to be listed, so, yep.
So we've got a strategy that we are about to launch. This question is in regard to proof. We're asking somebody to document that they gave some money and entirely understand all the issues surrounding that. But we recently, and we kind of borrowed this idea from someplace else, where this kind of touches a little bit on the need for organizations to continue to find ways of supporting annual operations. And then at the same time, be going out there to ask people for, finding planned gifts or legacy gifts. We found one donor who was willing, and you may probably have heard of this strategy, was willing that for every person that will indicate to them, and what indicate means is kind of my question, indicate to you that they have left a planned gift, I will give you $1,000. So this donor is willing to do that up to 5 of them a year. So over the next 3 years. So, and this person can, understands about the idea of you can't necessarily ask them for documentation about that. And he's willing. But how do we, do you have any thoughts on us managing that to be able to tell this person, yeah, this person has indicated that they're going to give a plan, they're gonna set up a planned gift for us. Can you give me any guidance along those lines?
So we actually do have a form that they complete that says the documents, it's a straightforward form, it basically has their name and address information for us to be able to include it in our system. It asks them if they want to be anonymous or not, and it asks them, what type of gift it is and what professional advisor is related to it, so that we have a point of contact when we know that person. So there is things you can ask, and they do sign that form. And I would say most people won't, do that form if they didn't actually do the thing.
Right.
And probably would give some confidence to your matching donor, which is really cool. So,
Yeah.
and that's awesome that, that donor wants to motivate.
Fun gifts.
Yeah, planning gifts, that's great. And that legacy society form is something we can share if that's something that's useful to people. So.
So when you think about prospecting, for both bequest and endowment, you want to start with the low hanging fruit of the people that care the most about the organization. And as Tom said, we don't always know what people, the qualifications or what kind of giving capacity people have. So really looking at your board members, former board members, volunteers who are very emotionally attached, obviously your longtime donors and major gift donors, and even people that give in the annual appeal. If you have data that shows they've given for the last 5 or 10 years, that's a great person to sit down and have a cup of coffee with to think about how they could grow their impact for the organization. Certainly there's all kinds of naming gift opportunities depending on the structure and the mission of your organization. And thinking about multi-generational family involvement is also really helpful when you have families that have been in the area forever and are very dedicated to the mission of your organization. What can they do at each level, and how do you engage that whole family?
And just as another thing too, like when you start talking about planned gifts, people are gonna come and tell you, I have a planned gift for your organization. I mean, just like today, the people that raised their hand and said, you still get some now. Yeah, people are doing that. I would say most nonprofits, if not all, have some planned gift pointed to them that they don't know about. And we do so much work to, put it out there, how important it is to tell us when they're leaving a planned gift, but we still receive gifts at the Community Foundation that are out of nowhere, so.
Fun part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just around, so we're putting all this focus on like individuals providing gifts. I'm curious if in the agency funds, you also take gifts from like businesses as well, if that's like also.
Yeah, any gifts can be received by the agency fund. So, it can be a corporate gift, it can be, family foundation, really individuals, corporations, foundations, all those gifts can go into the agency fund.
Any other questions? We wanted to take a moment for you to reflect a little bit on these different categories of prospects that I just mentioned. If you wanted to just jot down really the number in the organization that you can think of off the top of your head, and then we can share that out a little bit.
Yeah, It also trigger warning, there's math involved. It's arithmetic though, so it should be okay. I do have a calculator in my pocket if anybody needs it. so.
Remember, we're all with nonprofits, right? Yeah.
All right, so yeah, just take a minute, put down what you think is in that category for your organization and add it up. Do a little show and tell.
What do you consider long-term donor, 5, 10?
That's totally up to you.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think 5 enough.
5,
Pretty significant.
consistent, it's 5, okay,
I think so.
year over year.
5 years in a row.
All right.
Right.
Yeah. Andrews, is that where you're at? Or did you put down? I didn't put anything there now, I'm sorry for this.
For those online, if you want to start putting your totals in the chat, we're gonna ask the room for their totals in a
I
second.
think I'm not. Yeah.
Reason I didn't go into medicine.
I know, that's up to you. Exactly.
Get started?
It's a,
All right, well, we'll get started. As you look at board members, just by a show of hands, how many would you say have 10 or less? And 50 or less?
And as you go through the whole list, you know, like, what is the total? Like, is anybody over 100? Of all those categories?
Oh, yes, yeah, yes.
Okay. Anybody over 500?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is anybody less than in their total less than 50?
Yes.
So we do have. We do have some, one online that says less than 50 for their total. Right,
It's 300.
can I ask what you think your total is, if it's less than 50?
30 or 40.
Okay, so 30 or 40. So all those numbers are great starting points, even 30, you know? And is your organization relatively young?
We're almost 20 years old.
Almost 20 years old?
Oh,
Okay.
small.
Okay, all right. So sometimes the numbers grow as you grow. But in general, as long as you have, I would say 3 to 5 people to ask, that's a great starting point. You know, especially when you start thinking about, you know, who on that list.
Had a range between about 30 to 50.
Online. Okay.
Someone asked if board members are supposed to give.
I mean, board members and former board members, I think, would be best friends for sure. And would be wanting to do this, but different organizations have different sort of relationships with their board members. So it's hard to necessarily say. But
It's never too late to institute change. And if board members haven't given, can really, set a goal for 100% board participation, and that doesn't set an amount, it just says, please give something in this fiscal year. And then you can grow from there, so I think it's never too late. With that.
There's a bottom line thing for me, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
You can have the same approach with employees too, right? Okay. As their
Depend on the structure,
type situation,
kind of organization.
bar association, community act. Center.
I think you have to, it depends on the culture. You may have to treat employees a little differently, just recognizing that they're working for pay and it's a little different, but there may be ways for them to get involved where the ask isn't as direct or aggressive. You may have more thoughts on that, but.
Yeah, I would say I definitely hear for the nonprofit, people who have worked for nonprofits that come and do legacy planning here. I hear them say frequently, I'm not including that organization that I worked for in my plan. I gave them, my blood, sweat and tears. So, and it's not that they don't love it. It's just, they gave their gift that way, so.
Like giving to the company store.
Right.
It just doesn't feel ethically correct.
Right, and the reason it's not on that list is because it's definitely not, it's not to say it couldn't happen that a employee might want to leave a planned gift. But it's just not the place to go solicit, I think.
I guess I would also add a comment around like organizational capacity to be like stewarding relationships with the donors, right? Like somebody like me who's managing a really small team and I'm wearing hundreds of hats. Like I'm not going to be able to steward a relationship with like 30 big donors in a meaningful way, right? But I might be able to manage 5 to 15 or something, right? So it's kind of like when we think about these numbers, yeah, my number might be 40 or 30 or 25, but realistically, the stewardship to get people to think about that, like on top of donor stewardship and running programs and everything else.
Yeah.
There's like different levels of capacity within each org too.
Right, like for you, you might just have one conversation about plan giving each quarter. And that might be just the max.
Right.
And the only thing you might do for a legacy society might be, acknowledge them at an annual event or something. It could be very, minimal,
Right.
but there needs to be something. Yeah.
Think about, maybe a group, having a signature breakfast or some event where you can acknowledge, thank, steward collectively. If you don't have time to reach all those 30 people in a year, not practical. So you prioritize your top 5 or top 10, maybe deputize other members of your staff if appropriate, if they have the right skill set. And otherwise think about events where you could reach that whole group.
Yeah, I think my question doesn't match the segment that we're in.
Oh, okay.
I was just talking about
Giving in general.
but
Yeah,
not
it's
playing.
still-
Yeah, not playing.
Yeah.
Do it though, if you feel you can. I'm not asking.
So, yeah, thinking about the development process for legacy gifts, you really need to know your market. And I've been educated by Tom a little bit about what the age is, the average age of a gift, when a bequest actually comes for an organization. And that's when someone's over 80 years old. That has to do with their lifespan and how things are shifting. So the average age at adoption of a final will or trust is the late 70s. And ideally, if you're working on this vehicle, you want to come in before that. You don't want to be at the stage where there's a final, firmly embedded will or trust. So probably that, the ideal age where you might reach prospective donors for planned giving would be in their late 50s or early 60s. We don't want to be ageist, but we want to be strategic with your time, and you don't want to be knocking on doors or having conversations with people where it's too late. So sometimes age can matter more than wealth, but also sometimes wealth matters more than age. So you need to know who your base of support is coming from. And that is really critical. Segmenting donors is a really critical piece of this. And, the suggestion of age and wealth, I think, is a really good one, just to kind of understand where people are in their journey of retirement, of moving, where they are, and then also in wealth, if you're able to get that information. Whole databases and other places. So again, it's all about deploying your very precious resources appropriately and segmenting by age and by economic means. And we know that constituents of all of your organizations are probably so different. Some have more wealth, some may be a younger group, some may be older. So kind of just knowing the profile and going from there.
Yeah, and for the small organizations, maybe you don't even have, a sense of the ages, and, maybe you can't segment, maybe it is just putting it out there generally and letting people raise their own hand or decide when this can be implemented. And I'll just echo what Rebecca said about the moving part. There's a lot of people that maybe not immediately when they retire, but shortly after they retire, they start spending more and more time someplace else, which, again, can lead, if they're civically obsessed people, which we know most of the people that do volunteer, care about their communities, and if they have a new community, they're going to care about that place too. So it's going to cause some shifts. So it is sort of an impetus to get in early. Because then at least they might add more, not just replace you. Yeah. Other questions on that? All right, so next slide, we'll talk a little bit about conversations. So I've mentioned this before, you start with best friends and you have one-on-one conversations. You talk about this as something that is a new focus of the organization. You talk about it as important, whether you want to connect it back to the 5 for CNY data or other data, or your goal around what the fund is what you're trying to get the fund to the level, and what that means for your organization, what that's going to change. So explaining the importance is key. And then, like I said, once you have even just a couple people that are in, that's when you take it to the next layer. Maybe have a small event for the longtime donors, or maybe have a small event for former board members, and take that conversation and share that story or those stories that you just got. And again, you can definitely keep it simple, but it just needs to be continuous. And by continuous, I don't mean daily, but continuous. It needs to be something that is part of your conversational fabric, with people's constituents, and just the messaging that you put out. The first donor visit, if you want to go to the next slide, Corey, it's like any other donor visit. You need to be upfront with them about what you're doing. You need to find a time that's convenient for them. You need to be prepared and ready to answer questions. Ask yourself, what would I ask if I was going to do this? And we're going to get to on another slide. You should have done this conversation with yourself before you go ask it of anybody else. And then ultimately, there's different goals too. Like you may not know a donor well enough to have a conversation about a planned gift. So it may just be learning about them, assessing their interests. Maybe that's what the first meeting is all about. Solidifying the connection. Sometimes it might be confirming if they have a will or other, planned gifts in place. Because you maybe have heard that that was the case and you want to just talk about that. And sometimes it's actually just, having making me ask about doing a planned gift. Go on to the next slide. It's all about them. It's about listening, sticking to the time, thanking them, being clear, all the things that we normally do with donors. Documenting the meeting, sending a thank you note, making a plan for next steps. So none of that's really different with a legacy donor than a regular donor. And again, your organizational capacity will decide like to what extent you do all of those things. Any sort of questions about that? I just kind of wanted to hit it because I just wanted to make sure to make the point, but is there anything that's, yeah.
I guess more of a comment, Tom, excuse me, the reaction I've gotten a lot from folks as we've built out our agency fund and are beginning to build that endowment like fund is, hey, that's great, you should have that, I'm glad you have that. I don't want my money going to that. I'm a better investor of my own money and I can get better returns and I like to keep control. I want to give to you to do work, but I don't want my money sitting in your endowment fund. So just know that be prepared to pivot on how you want to utilize that investor's or that donor's money, because that is something in the many of conversations I've had with donors. I have one donor who wants his money going into our agency fund. And many donors that support us every year, but most of them that say, no, I don't want, that's great, you should do that, just not with my money.
Yeah, and maybe it's a pivot at that point to the, well, you're not gonna be able to do the management after you're gone. So would you consider, making part of your, financial plan point to us? Any other questions or comments on donor visits?
Tom, I just wanted to give you a 10-minute remaining.
Yeah. Thanks. All right, so next slide. So we won't really dig into these, but these are just things you might even just want to talk through or think through for yourself. You may have asked for a planned gift before and maybe it didn't go well. Maybe it went great. When you start to ask for a planned gift, you got to have a plan and you need to share that with somebody. You need to, you have to have somebody in your organization, whether it's another staff member, other board members, or a committee of the board, subcommittee of the board, to really be able to talk through these and talk through probably right now you say, well, there's some stumbling blocks. I don't know if this is gonna work that well. I'm gonna have to work through some things. This is gonna be challenging. And also just offer that my team, we're available to kind of talk through that with you as well. And that's whether you have a fund with us or not. We want to encourage greater giving, especially planned giving in central New York. And so, we work, get nonprofits and professional advisors all the time that don't lead to anything related to a fund at the community foundation. But it's important to making a charitable gift happen. So we're happy to do that and be a resource. Probably because of the time, if you want to go on the next slide, Corey. I think I'll just talk through this as well as opposed to actually doing it. You should actually write down what you're going to say. And anybody else in your organization that's going to reach out to somebody for a planned gift should actually write down what they're going to say. They should tailor it to themselves. They may want to begin, by, just saying, how they're engaged with the organization and where that came from, you know, what their history is with the organization. They might want to start by sharing that to lay some groundwork. But then you want to ask that of the donor. You know, you want to, I mean, that's got to be, you know, in the conversation is, why did you first become involved with the community foundation or the entity that you're, you know, working with? And you should literally practice that. And not just one side of the conversation, both sides of the conversation. You need to practice being on the donor side with whoever else is doing this work with you in your organization. And the reason for that is you need to actually know what it feels like for them. And you need to know what it's going to feel like when you're making that ask. Because even though it's pretend, you still feel it. So, and you need to practice. There's consistency, Jan. This is my legacy planning subject matter expert here at the Community Foundation. She's our senior philanthropic advisor, Jan Lane. So, and so there's value in practicing, and part of it is just so that you're more comfortable having the conversation. Part of it is so that it becomes consistent, and it's not only consistent with you as an individual, but it's consistent across your organization. So that everybody that's doing this is having a similar conversation. And, you know, that is important because you can't really adjust your process and make changes to improve your process if everybody's doing the process a different way. So I would absolutely encourage you. Some other questions that you could ask is, what do you hope our organization looks like in 10, 20, 50 years? That's a great one to ask that directly ties into the existence of this fund. You know, that's why our board decided that we're creating this fund so that we can be more sustainable. So in 20 or 50 years, we can be doing these things that are compelling for our mission. Yeah, so you can click through the next couple of slides and yeah, you can go past that one too, or Corey. Questions donors might ask. We've alluded to this, you know, people have brought this up. You need to be able to answer these, you know, before you start doing these conversations. And this goes back to that plan. What is the plan? What is the goal? You know, what is, you know, who manages it? You know, who else is given in this way? And, you know, can't tell the anonymous ones, but you know, that's part of why you ask people, can I share your story? You know, so you can answer that question. Should I talk to my advisor? What's the answer to that question?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Always. And then like, do I have to? Do I get to use my name as sensitive? You know, sometimes they don't want to.
Have a question, like for people who experience having these conversations about plan giving, how many of you had somebody say, well, I don't want to talk about my will or death or anything, like kind of like the monkey in the room at that point, or the elephant in the room? You know, because a lot of people don't, I find that they don't like talking about that. So how do you get around that, or what experiences have you?
Well, it's part of why you start the conversation with the stories of connection, both for you and then for the donor, and let them share that, because it kind of helps them transcend and realize that. So in that moment, they do realize that this is like a thing that's going to happen after they're gone, but they connect with that feeling of transformational giving that might make a difference to them in that way. And yeah, you're definitely going to get people, you're going to get all the responses. You know, you're going to definitely get people that say, I can't talk about this. You know, I am not willing to accept that I'm dying ever. So, you know, and that's just the way it is, you know. So, I mean, you can't, yeah, in every conversation that you have is a success. regardless of whether a planned gift comes out of it. Because the other thing is that same person might have this epiphany 2 months later, or 2 years later, or 10 years later, and say, you know what? I am gonna die. And I do love those organizations. And they like may be so thankful that you brought up that ask in that moment. You know, it could be life changing. This is like connecting people to something that is like gonna live, they're gonna be able to live their values after they're gone. You know, that is a part of the brain that doesn't get accessed a lot. It's a special conversation and a special moment.
I would just say the more common reaction that I've gotten is, my estate plan's already determined. My giving's all set up already through that. And that's just a pivot to talk, and what I would do is talk about, you know, we received a gift from somebody that we never met. I think that's fairly common, probably. She had been a donor and we had no idea, not even from our area. But saw us in a very small publication and decided that she wanted to give to us. So kind of sharing those stories, I think, inspires others, or at least plant seeds is the hope, is that, okay, they've heard, I've made the pitch, they've heard it, it's up to them to decide. That's all you can really do in my estimation.
Final thoughts?
Well, I mean, one other thought I just had is a lot of these are family decisions, so you might be having a conversation with one person, but they might really feel the need or to connect with their family. So this, you know, this slide on questions donors may ask, I think if that isn't already something that's done, could be a great FAQ one pager front and back to answer some of these questions so that it gives sort of a really helpful tool for that person you had a conversation with to absorb the information in a conversation and maybe share those resources. I don't know if that is something you do now, but it just kind of called out to me that those questions could all be answered in a really simple way. And then be a centerpiece for future conversations for the family members.
So we can just go to the, I mean, there's special situations that you may need to partner with us or a consultant or a law firm, you know, so I'll just, you'll get these in the slides when they come out. But yeah, on the final thoughts, yeah, I just want you to know the Community Foundation and community foundations in general care about this and work on this and can support nonprofits doing this work. So we are glad to do that. Any other final thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, our law firm also does this work, estate planning work, sophisticated to simple level, and can always reach out to me and support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're around if you have questions you want to ask, you know, feel free.